Challenging board behaviors. Look at this, and I just ask you to challenge you to think, am I guilty of any of this? Members who act unilaterally. Members who do not attend or participate.
Miscommunity.
Okay, so duty of loyalty, and we talked about this a little bit last time, but yes, it's not about, once the decision's made, you move on. And that's part of those decision-making models. If you look them up, it talks about how do you manage that. We've made a decision, even if I don't agree, I'm not going to keep landing on that. We've got to move on, because otherwise you will sit in 1,000 meetings and get nothing done. It's making a decision when it's time to move forward. Members who pursue outside agendas as well. All of those things can actually lead to conflict. So when these things happen, here are some tasks that you can do to help manage this. So if you have a unilaterally acting member, you want to clarify authority for tasks, roles, decision-making, and report. Your committee or board needs to put in writing at some point, this is the responsibility. This is the decision-making we're going to do. Talking about that onboarding and induction, this is part of it. Introducing an onboarding or prior to running for the board. You guys are starting to do this with these classes, right? Most of the time, people don't even understand what they're getting into. It's just, wow, I'm really tired of my maintenance taking so long, I'm going to run for the board. Maybe that works in a small HOA when you have like 100 homes, but here that's not the same. It's a whole different beast. This is a large corporate entity in some cases, depending on which board you're serving on. So reviewing roles and responsibility of boards or committee members, sometimes just having a refresher. This is what it is. This is our role. These are the committees. These are the responsibilities. Having a code of conduct. I cannot stress this enough. When you have onboarding, establishing an individual board culture, because it will be individual because it's comprised of different individuals and it changes, what are your behavioral expectations in stating clearly and executing upon, if you behave out of line, this is the consequence. You're going to be asked, if you're going to get combative, we will ask for this. If you're going to talk out of turn, everybody will tell you to stop, because the problem is if one person doesn't, one person's talking out of turn and then everyone keeps letting it happen, it's not going to stop. Everyone has to be responsible for it. And if people aren't and somebody finally says, time out, look, remember we agreed to this, this is our code of conduct, no politicking, this is happening, everyone needs to be willing to hold that person to that. This is where accountability is crucial. This is where it's surprising to me there's no board self-assessment that's not done here. Because almost every board I know, just as much as the CEO has an annual performance review against the goals, the board has a performance review against the goals that they've set for the year. So outline behavioral expectations. It sounds silly, but we have to tell this to every board we work with. How do you handle interrupting? How do you handle getting off topic? It doesn't matter how long you've been doing it for. These are challenges. For non-attending, non-contributing board members, first and foremost, confirm the reason for their absence. So many times we see people just jumping to conclusions. Like I talked about before, you don't know what could have happened. Maybe they have a sick spouse. Maybe they themselves are not well and they're fighting illness and they don't want to talk about it. So instead of assuming they're just quitting or they're lazy or they don't care, try and get to the bottom before it's talked about. Go to that person and ask first. Then check your governing documents for a requirement. So most of them state you have to participate in so many meetings or there's recalls and consequences. If it's not established, part of your code of conduct should probably cover attendance expectations. And maybe not just attendance, but also participation. Whether it's over, you're participating too much or too little. Clarifying expectations for screening or onboarding of new members. Talk about this. We talked about this a little bit in the last class that's going to be out there. How many hours a week? This is not a 5-hour-a-week job. Some of you laugh because you're like 5 hours a day and I'm happy. Volatile group members. Create a group contract. If you are finding conflict and you're like, we don't have time to sit down and set a code of conduct for our board. If you're having conflict, pause. Put a time out on it. We do this all the time when we're working with organizations and we're working with groups of people and teams, and we say, time out. We are escalating too fast. This is happening over and over again. For the next 3 weeks, this is the code of conduct or group contract. Every one of you, let's set some expectations here. They may be temporary. It may be it's a contentious time. Maybe it's around election time when everything's starting to happen and you're noticing the behaviors getting out of line. Set a group contract. It can be short term. This is how we're going to behave. These topics are on the table. These are off the table for the next month. We need to make a decision. You know what? Talking about this issue that needs to move forward, that's long term. And right now we are facing a very near term decision that has to be made right now. So for the next 2 weeks, we're not talking about that one. It's completely off the table. This is what we have to do right now as a board and as a group. Then bring it back. Acknowledge it'll come back. Establish an approach to communicating and presenting. If you are supposed to be using Robert's Rules of Order, let's talk about which ones. There's a lot. I'm guessing you don't have to use every single one of them. What is the protocol? Reviewing it with the team. And then appoint a chairperson who has effective interpersonal and meeting management skills. You probably have someone, and if they're the chair, everyone has to respect that responsibility. This is their job, is to help manage meetings. Sometimes you need that. Members with outside agendas. Again, code of conduct that addresses the conflict of interest policy. By nature, there is legal statements with it within Davis Sterling and a variety of other things that help with that, but clarify the role to the member and then clarifying their responsibility to act in the best interest of the organization. Sometimes it's just, hey, step back. It sounds like we have some personal interest here, all of us. Everyone always has vested interest, and remind everyone about the role representing the whole organization. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to walk through these as much. They're in detail, but Thomas Kilmann, this is a validated tool. And if you go online, you can take a quiz somewhere. Otherwise, to print it, it would have cost a bunch of money for you guys, so I didn't. But there's basically 5 approaches to conflict management. And sometimes knowing how people just operate, this is another one of those group tools you can use, is really helpful. So there's avoidance, accommodation, competition, compromise, and collaboration. Most of us have a touch of each of those. There's also this interesting paradox theory with conflict management, which is, by and large, you may be one of these categories. Maybe I actually work with somebody who is very much a compromiser and really works on compromising as much as possible. Under stress, we show up different. Under stress, complete competitor. Just wants the win, just wants the win, just wants the win. So you need to be mindful of that, because sometimes when there's a tense situation, we revert to a different one, but just knowing where people go can be incredibly helpful. So I told you before, I have somebody on my team, they're an avoider. I used to take it so personally. My first year, I was like, oh my gosh, and I started going to those issues of esteem. They don't like me, they don't like my ideas, they don't want to work with me. And finally someone on my team said, nope, they just do that to everybody. Ignore it. That's just what they do. It's their thing. It's not you. It's just their feelings. They don't like conflict. They don't like it even if there's the potential for conflict, so they'll just run away. And now I've learned when it happens, it's not about me. It's not an issue of esteem. It's not an issue of affiliation. It's literally just a content thing. They don't like conflict. And if it might happen, they're just going to avoid it. So you can read through these in detail, and it'll talk to you about the goal of each of those, the psychology behind it. And believe it or not, there's actually appropriate application for each of these. There are a time and place for each of those to be used. Another thing that's here is developing a conflict resolution plan. If you are in a situation where you have a lot of conflict, this is a great tool. Appoint somebody who's really good at being Switzerland. They're neutral. Okay? They can hear both sides of the story, and ask them to help you with this. First of all, get everyone to explain their intentions. When you hear all sides of the story, then your goal is to find common ground. There's got to be something we can agree on, because sometimes we think we're so on different islands that we can't even look at the water in between us that we share. Then try and get everybody to look and be flexible. Very seldom in life do we get a complete win. There's always something we have to sacrifice on it. So in good governance, you need to understand there's never going to be a perfect solution. But what's the one that's for the best interest of the organization? Go through your options, resolve the conflict, and then take action. Yes?
Do you suggest that if there is conflict within the board, that you try to resolve it within the members of that board, or get somebody, let's for example, from another board, somebody like Mike,
Okay.
and have them come in and help you with the conflict resolution? How does that?
I don't think it's a right or wrong approach. I think it depends on the nature of the conflict. It depends on the history of conflict resolution. Have you actually successfully resolved conflict in the past? Because if the answer is no, you probably want to go outside, because whatever reason the dynamics are not there. And once, my suggestion is, if you have to go outside, then what I would say is, after you have resolution and you've gone through that process, you need to set expectations. How are we going to handle conflict next time? Do you ever do plus deltas? You're familiar, some of you may have done this. After you go through a situation like this, I think it's really important for the group to sit and go, what worked well? Okay, where did we have wins? What did we miss entirely? And identify those so next time you're more likely to do that. That's really important. Learn from the conflict instead of just staying there.
Thank you.
But this is a nice slide. You can print, you can slide it in the back of a binder, anything for meetings. That's why I put it in there. Just some basic communication tips in general. People are going to doubt what you're going to say and do, but they're going to believe what you actually do. So if you say something, yeah, I mean, you gotta walk the talk. That's really what it comes down to. Tools to create a positive culture. Statement of mutual expectations for board members. I know I've said this like 18 times now, maybe 19. It's that important. State it, write it down. Periodic self-evaluation. Managing and organizing committees and agendas. Educating potential candidates. Onboarding and educating new board members. And practice continuing education. Take the time as a board. You know what? Maybe it's good every 2 years to have conflict management class. Let everyone get refreshed on it. It's really easy to get set in our ways. Even if they're good ways, they might be better. There's some tips here on running effective meetings. These are just in general. I'll put those there, including the one that says start and end on time, and I'm 5 minutes over, so take with that what you'd like. And the last thing I put in there is using neutral language. So there are statements we make all the time that we may not realize actually have loadedness. So for example, we might say good idea, and we're like, well, that's good, right? But if I'm telling you good idea and I'm just trying to validate what you're saying, and maybe you don't agree with what he's doing by me saying good idea, you immediately are going to go, oh, well, she thinks that's a good idea. I don't. So sometimes when we think we're being positive, it actually has a judgment statement, which can cause conflict. So there's a whole list in here that you can say. I think under stress, what's your point? Can you get to your point? Can be a little complicated. So sometimes, can you elaborate? Can you explain? Can you clarify? And there's a whole bunch of them I put in here for reference. So I don't want to hear about it. Probably not something you should say. I'm listening. Can you talk to me about it? Instead of saying, do that, could you? If somebody's yelling, or if you want to say, if you're going to raise your voice, I'm not talking to you. It's like telling an irrational person to calm down. It never works. That just fires them up, right? Like, I don't understand that, and we do that, right? I do it with my kids, too. I do it with my partner. Like, it's like, no, they're upset. Calm down. Let's talk about this. They're clearly not calm, and telling them to calm down is not going to help at all. So maybe saying, I have a hard time hearing you when you're yelling or raising your voice. It's hard for me to hear when you're talking like that. Can you bring it here? So little things like this. I wasn't the one who, putting and positioning people against each other is not going to be effective. So just ask them, can you talk to me a little bit more about this, instead of assigning value to it. But you didn't understand. Okay, hey, sensitizing it, this is hard for me, but I really want to hear what you're saying. Okay? And assigning that. Sometimes that means having to own something that may not fully be there, right? This is hard for me. Maybe it really isn't hard for you. But by saying that, it's going to help neutralize the conversation. Why are you making this such a big deal? Wow, this seems important to you. You've now validated their emotion. What's funny about emotion is there's some great books about it out there right now, but we tend to have gotten to culturally where we shift away from emotion storytelling, like, oh, it's just business as usual. Let's separate the two. But really, emotion can be a really positive thing, because if it wasn't for emotional people who were passionate, we would never have had change. So it's learning to channel and harness that in your organization. That's really important. 6 deadly words. This is another one. These are great ones you can have as reference for conversations or building action plans. You automatically, it takes out the we in it, and you are a board that works together. But, because that's immediately invalidating, I hear what you're saying, but that's immediately going to put somebody on the defensive. Always, never. There are very few things in life that are always. And there are very few things in life that are never. I could say I would never rob a bank, and then I find out that my child's dying, and if I don't get medicine, we can play this game all day long. I'd probably consider it. If my kid was going to die, I'd sit in jail with my child alive, right? So there always and never are hard words. You should never use never. Should and must, those assign, I'm telling you what to do, considering this, those are words that if you can come up with other ways to say it, it's going to make people less defensive.